Theodoric the Great was born in 454 AD and was the son of Theodemir, who was the king of the Ostrogoths, along with his two brothers, Valimir and Vidimir. It was claimed that his family was descended from a long line of illustrious, semi-legendary kings. It was also even said that he was born on the same day that his uncle Valimir won a great victory over the Huns. The Ostrogoths, or Eastern Goths, were descendants of the Greuthungi, a branch of the Goths who had been conquered by the Huns around 374. The Ostrogoths kept their own kings under the Huns, and played an important role in Attila's campaign in the 450s. Following the death of Attila in 453, the Hun Empire disintegrated and the Ostrogoths became independent. Shortly after this, the Romans allowed them to settle as semi-autonomous foederati in the province of Pannonia. In 461, Theodoric was sent as a hostage to Constantinople, where he remained for 10 years. As a high-ranking hostage, Theodoric was well treated and became a favorite of Emperor Leo I. His upbringing in what was then the world's largest and most splendid city made a great impression on Theodoric. Throughout the time that Theodoric was in Constantinople, the Ostrogoths were fighting their German neighbors and wandering remnants of the Huns. During these wars, his uncle Valimir had been killed, leaving Theodoric's father, Theodemir, as the senior Ostrogothic king. Theodoric returned to his people in 471 and set to prove himself as a war leader. These Sarmatians had recently captured the Roman city of Singidunum, and Theodoric, still only a teenager, raised an army on his own initiative and drove them out. Instead of returning the city to the Romans, he kept it for the Ostrogoths. For this, Theodoric was acclaimed king, alongside his father and uncle Vidimir. In 473, Theodemir and Vidimir decided that war-ravaged Pannonia was no longer a suitable homeland for their people. To pressure the Romans into relocating them, they decided that Vidimir would invade Italy, while Theodemir would attack the Eastern Empire. Vidimir's campaign failed, he died in Italy, and the survivors went to Gaul and joined the Visigoths. Theodemir launched his campaign from Singidunum and advanced as far as Niš in modern-day Serbia. Theodoric next led a raid with a number of experienced advisors through the Balkans and into Greece. Theodemir followed up his son's success by laying siege to Thessalonica. Negotiations followed, and the Romans allowed the Ostrogoths to settle in Macedonia. Shortly after this, probably in 474, Theodemir died, and Theodoric succeeded to sole kinship of the Ostrogoths. The next few years of Theodoric's reign were dominated by his rivalry with Theodoric Triarius, the leader of a separate band of Goths that the Romans had settled in the Balkans as foederati some years previously. The Eastern Emperor Zeno was only willing to support one Gothic leader, so the two Theodorics had to compete for imperial recognition. When Triarius rebelled in 478, Zeno allied with Theodoric to mount a joint attack on him. However, Zeno failed to supply the troops he had promised, and Theodoric found himself facing his rival alone. But the Goths refused to fight one another, and the two leaders were reconciled for a short time. Zeno broke up his alliance with Theodoric by offering Triarius a generous settlement, including a generalship. Angry at his betrayal, and with his people facing starvation, Theodoric led his men on a campaign of plundering and killing through the Balkans, until Triarius rebelled again, forcing Zeno to open negotiations. Theodoric demanded that he be given Triarius' command and Roman citizenship. Zeno refused, as he was wary of replacing one troublesome barbarian general with another. In 481, Triarius was accidentally killed in a riding accident, and his son Recitac took over as leader. However, he was murdered by Theodoric at a banquet in 484. Recitac's following of around 30,000 people joined the Ostrogoths, raising their strength to around 100,000 men, women, and children. Also in 484, Theodoric was made consul, but he was constantly switching between loyalty to the empire and outright rebellion for the next few years. Although the Romans were not strong enough to expel the Ostrogoths were not strong enough to dictate terms to the Romans. Zeno came up with a plan to solve his problem with the Ostrogoths. In 488, he gave Theodoric a commission to invade Italy, overthrow its ruler Odoacer, and govern it until the emperor should come to claim his supremacy. Odoacer was a barbarian general who in 476 AD had overthrown Romulus Augustulus, the last powerless Roman emperor of the West. He was then proclaimed king by the German mercenaries he commanded. At the time, Zeno had accepted Odoacer's offer to rule Italy as a viceroy, which at least maintained the legal position that it remained part of the Roman Empire. From Zeno's point of view, sending Theodoric west was a win-win situation. If Theodoric had lost, that would be the end of the Ostrogoths, and if he won, at least they would be a long way from Constantinople. The offer was attractive to Theodoric too. He was well aware that the Ostrogoths were in a very insecure position in the Eastern Roman Empire, and Zeno's commission gave him the opportunity to win legitimate control of a rich kingdom. The Ostrogoths gathered in present-day Bulgaria and set off for Italy in the autumn of 488. The early stages of the route, up the lower reaches of the Sava River Valley, lay across territory occupied by the Gepids, old enemies of the Ostrogoths, who refused them passage. The Gepids held a strong position on the opposite bank of the Sava, somewhere near Samium, and they repulsed all attacks until Theodoric led a charge across the river in person and broke the Gepid line. Part of the plunder from the battle was a Gepid wagon train loaded with grain. One set of Gepid territory, Theodoric followed the same route through the Julian Alps that Alaric the Visigoth had taken invading Italy 80 years beforehand. The Ostrogoths moved slowly, encumbered by thousands of wagons, pack animals, herds of cattle, flocks of sheep, and non-combatants. Of the 100,000 or so Ostrogoths, only around one-third would have been able-bodied men capable of bearing arms. The rest would have been women, children, and old people. It was not until summer 489 that they began to descend to the plains around Aquileia. Odoacer had prepared his defenses and was waiting for the Ostrogoths in a strongly fortified camp overlooking a ford crossing the Isonzo River. On August 28th, Theodoric forded the river, stormed the camp, and chased Odoacer out of the area. Odoacer then retreated to Verona and built another fortified camp outside of the city, on the east bank of the Adige River. Once again leading from the front, on September 30th, Theodoric stormed the camp. Odoacer and some of his followers managed to break out of the self-made trap and fled south to Ravenna, his capital. Theodoric continued west and in October occupied Milan. Once in Milan, Odoacer's chief of staff and a large body of German troops surrendered to Theodoric. In a rare lapse of judgment, Theodoric made them allies and sent them with some of his own men to besiege Odoacer in Ravenna. However, upon arriving, these new allies reverted back to their old allegiances and had Theodoric's men murdered. On hearing of the betrayal, Theodoric moved his forces to Pavia, a more easily defended position. Both leaders spent the winter of 489-490 in diplomatic activity. Theodoric won support from the Visigoths, while Odoacer persuaded the Burgundians to invade Italy by playing on their fear of encirclement by the Goths. While Theodoric was distracted by the Burgundians, he was eventually able to negotiate their withdrawal. Odoacer began to reassert control in northern Italy. Theodoric left Pavia with an army of Ostrogoths and Visigoths, and on August 11th, he inflicted another heavy defeat on Odoacer at the river Adda, 10 miles east of Milan. Odoacer fled back to Ravenna and prepared for a siege. As capital of the Western Roman Empire from 402, and Odoacer's capital from 476, Ravenna had been heavily fortified and was also a port, so it could be supplied and reinforced from the sea. In September 490, Theodoric began to send out regular mounted patrols to stop any traffic going to the city by road, but lacking a fleet, Theodoric was unable to stop ships delivering supplies. Odoacer sent out raiding parties to harass the Ostrogoths at every opportunity. To protect his rear, Theodoric sent death squads throughout Italy to eliminate as many of Odoacer's supporters as they could find, but Odoacer's main general Tufa remained at large with an army in Lombardy. In July 491, Odoacer received reinforcements from the Herules, who lived beyond the Danube, and tried to win back the initiative with a surprise night attack on Theodoric's camp. After hard fighting and heavy casualties on both sides, Theodoric prevailed again. As he had throughout the war, Theodoric showed his ability to rally his soldiers in difficult situations. In August 492, Theodoric captured Rimini, which was still occupied by Odoacer, and with it he acquired a fleet of light and fast war galleys. He began to blockade Ravenna from the sea, cutting off all supplies. By January 493, the population of Ravenna was beginning to starve, and on February 27th, with no hope of relief, Odoacer surrendered. 6 days later, Theodoric entered Ravenna to the welcoming cheers of its people. Theodoric agreed not only to spare Odoacer's life, but he agreed that they should rule Italy together. On March 15th, Theodoric invited Odoacer to a feast to celebrate the peace. When they had been separated from the guards, Theodoric drew his sword and killed Odoacer on the spot. Like Odoacer before him, Theodoric continued to rule Italy as if it was still part of the Roman Empire. Theodoric never described himself as king of Italy, only king of the Ostrogoths in Italy. He respected the right of the emperor in Constantinople to appoint the consuls of Rome, and even his right to make laws. However, Theodoric always ruled from Ravenna. He consulted the Roman Senate, continued the dole of free grain to the Roman poor, and sponsored games in the circus. He continued the policy of Odoacer to rule Italy through the existing Roman institutions, with his government being run entirely by Roman bureaucrats. On the other hand, the military was under the complete control of the Ostrogoths, under the veneer of a civilian government. Throughout all of this, Theodoric remained a barbarian warlord. Goths were even forbidden to have a Roman education, lest it sap their martial vigor. Romans were forbidden to carry any weapon larger than a penknife. The separation of Roman and Ostrogoths extended to all aspects of life, amounting to a system of segregation that was intended to maintain the dominance of the Ostrogoths and to prevent their assimilation into the far more numerous Roman population. Romans and Ostrogoths could not legally marry, and they were judged in different courts. Religion was also a major obstacle to assimilation. The Ostrogoths were Arian Christians, and were regarded by their Catholic subjects as heretics. After the fall of Ravenna, Theodoric never personally led an army in the field again, but he continued to direct campaigns run by able subordinates. By the year 500, he had extended his frontier as far north as the Danube, and to the Rhone River to the west, establishing a common frontier with the Visigoths. Theodoric regarded the Visigoths as kin, and he intervened to help them preserve their kingdom, after their king Alaric II was killed by the Frankish king Clovis at the Battle of Vouillé in 507. In 508, Theodoric fought a short war with the Eastern Roman Empire, as a result of which the Emperor Anastasius recognized his control over Illyricum. Shortly afterwards, the Visigoths recognized his sovereignty, and with this result, Theodoric had gone a considerable way towards reuniting the Western Roman Empire under his rule. The edifice of the Roman Empire survived more intact in Italy than any other barbarian kingdom, and this led to a quasi-imperial majesty to Theodoric's rule. Theodoric saw himself, and it was widely accepted, as the elder statesman of the barbarian kingdoms. Even Frankish King Clovis I, whose reign saw an unbroken succession of conquests, would back down rather than risk outright war with Theodoric. Under Theodoric, Italy enjoyed 30 years of peace and prosperity, but in his later years, he began to increasingly question the loyalty of his Roman subjects, and his rule became more oppressive. This may have been because he feared for the future of his kingdom, having failed to father a son. When he died of dysentery in 526, he was succeeded by his 8-year-old grandson Athalaric, under the regency of his daughter, Amalasuntha. She was never able to assert her authority over the Ostrogoths, of whom many could not accept being ruled by a woman. Her murder in 535 gave the Emperor Justinian the pretext to initiate the reconquest of Italy by his general Belisarius. Even though Theodoric was regarded as the most powerful of the barbarian kings of his day and a great military leader, his controversial decision to separate Goth and Roman societies in his kingdom may have doomed the lasting impact of his reign. In the end, while King Clovis continued to have a seminal impact on European history in the centuries that followed, Theodoric's achievements, unfortunately, died with him.